So now that we're comfortable with this start screen, it's time to create a new blank workbook and make ourselves familiar with the Excel interface. So I'm on the start screen, I'm clicked on Home. If I want to create a blank workbook, I can select Blank Workbook from here. Alternatively, I could go to New and click on Blank Workbook from here as well. As soon as I click it, it's going to load it up into Excel. And the first thing you'll notice with Excel 2021 is that we have a lovely, shiny new interface. This definitely has a much more modern look and feel to some of the older versions of Excel. For example, we now have these curved corners and the icons have been slightly refined, so everything just has a much more modern look. So now that we have a blank Excel workbook open in the main screen in Excel, let's take a look at the interface so we understand what we're looking at. So let's start at the top of the screen with this green bar that we can see. This is what we call the title bar. And among other things in this bar, you're going to see, as you would expect, the title of your document. Now, currently, I haven't saved this file, so the title of this document is really the generic default file name that Excel gives new workbooks. And that is normally Book 1, Book 2, Book 3, something along those lines. So my file name is currently Book 1. When I save this file, this is going to update and I'm going to see the new name in this title bar. Now, to the left of where we have Book 1, we have a number of different little icons. And this is called the Quick Access Toolbar. And again, we have an entire lesson dedicated to looking at the Quick Access Toolbar and also customizing it to suit our needs. So we're going to come back to that in a later lesson. Moving across to the middle of this title bar, we have a search bar in the middle. And notice that there is a keyboard shortcut for this search bar of Alt-Q. And from here, we can search for pretty much anything. Moving all the way over to the right-hand side, this is where you're going to find your account information again. And I can also sign out of my account from here also. I then have the Minimize button, which is going to minimize Excel down into what we used to call the system tray, now down into the taskbar. Now, when you minimize, it doesn't close Excel. Excel is still there. It just means you have to hover over the Excel icon in your taskbar and click to maximize that window. The button next to that allows us to restore this window down to a smaller size. So sometimes if you want to move this around and see something underneath this window, that can be quite useful. And if we hover over again, I can click to make this full size. Now, if you're wondering what these little pop-up grid structures are when I hover over that button, that's related to a new feature in Windows 11 called Snap Layouts. It's not actually part of Excel. And then right in the corner here, we have the Close button. Now, a really important thing to note here. If you click the cross in the top right-hand corner, it's going to close all of Excel. So if you have multiple workbooks open, it's going to close them all because this one closes Excel. If you want to close just the file that you have open, you would do that from File, and you can see that you have a Close option in here. Alternatively, there is a keyboard shortcut to close the file that you have open on your screen of Control W. That's going to close down just the workbook, but it's going to leave Excel open. So now that we've done that, we really need to load up another blank workbook. Now, a quick way of doing this is again to use a keyboard shortcut. So to create a blank workbook, Control N is going to do that for you. Now, underneath the title bar, we have these little tabs at the top here. So we have Home, Insert, Draw, Page Layout, Formulas, so on and so forth. And each time I click on one of these tabs, it shows me a ribbon. And that is the terminology in Excel. These are the tabs, and each tab has its own ribbon. So currently, I'm clicked on the Home ribbon. And what you see on these ribbons are basically the commands that you're going to use to execute tasks and actions in Excel. And these commands are categorized logically onto different ribbons. So in general, on the Home ribbon, you're going to find most of the things that you use most frequently. So things like cut, copy, paste, format painter. You're going to find your formatting options, alignment tools, number formatting, things like that. The insert ribbon is where you find all of the things that you can insert into your spreadsheet. So things like pictures, shapes, charts, links, text boxes, symbols, all of that good stuff. The draw ribbon is there if you need to make any annotations. So this is particularly useful if you work with a touch screen device and a stylus. You can ink up your documents, make annotations and notes. The next ribbon along deals with the layout of the page. So from here, I can do things like apply specific themes to my workbook. I can change the margins. Maybe I want to change the orientation of the workbook from landscape to portrait. I can do things like add a background image, turn the grid lines off and on, and also align objects, things like that. The formulas ribbon is where we go if we want to access our formula library. And formulas are really the backbone of Excel. It's really what it's known for, its calculations. So we're going to be doing a lot of work in here a bit later on in the course. The data ribbon is where we go to do things like connect to external data sources. So if you want to import data in from other applications, you would come into this ribbon. We can sort our data, we can filter, we can do things like remove duplicates and do various different types of data analysis. The review ribbon is generally the ribbon that I come to last. So once my spreadsheet has been done, I come to the review ribbon because this is where you come to do things like spell checking. You can add comments in, and you can also do things like protect the worksheet and the workbook. The view ribbon contains how we're actually viewing our workbook when we're working in it. So by default, you're always going to be in normal view. But you do have some other views here that you can switch between. I can also do things like zoom in and out from here, create new windows, arrange windows, and also switch between any open workbooks. Now, I've got two ribbons turned on here that you might not see in your copy of Excel. So the developer ribbon and also the power pivot ribbon are not turned on by default. If you want to use these, then you need to go into Excel options and toggle these on. Now, the developer ribbon contains a lot of the more advanced commands in Excel. So this is where you would come if you want to work with macros, if you want to take a look at the VBA code, all things like that. And we're not going to touch this ribbon in this beginner's course, so we're going to go in and turn those ribbons off in a moment. The final ribbon, Power Pivot, this is actually an add-in that I've turned on. And again, this is one of the more advanced features of Excel, so for this course, you don't need to have that ribbon either. So the final ribbon that you might possibly see, and again, this is one that isn't always turned on by default, is the Help ribbon. And that is pretty much what it says on the tin. This is where you can come if you need to access the help files. So let's quickly jump in to Excel options, because this will give you a good little introduction to how Excel options works, and turn off developer and PowerPoint ribbons, because we're not going to be using them. So we're going to go to File and all the way down to Options. Now, in these categories on the left-hand side, I'm going to go to Customize Ribbon. And here I can see all of the ribbons that I have turned on. So I'm going to deselect Developer and Power Pivot just to turn those off. And there we go. Hopefully my Excel now looks more similar to yours. Now, underneath these ribbons, we then have something called the name box over on the left-hand side, which is currently just showing the cell reference of where my cursor currently is. Now, if you're not sure what I mean by cell reference, just wait a few minutes. I'm going to explain that to you. And then next to the name box, we have the formula bar. And this is where you can come to edit your formulas. And you can also see what you have in your cells in this formula bar as well. And then underneath, we have the main part of the workbook, and that is the worksheet. Now, each worksheet has a grid structure. You can see it's organized by columns that are labeled with letters and rows that are labeled with numbers. And all of these rectangles that you can see in this grid are referred to as cells. And how do we identify different cells in a worksheet? Well, we use what we call the cell reference. So take a look at where my mouse is clicked currently. Notice the column that it's in is shaded in grey. It's in column H, and it's also row number 8. So the cell reference for this particular cell is H8. And you can see that in the name box just here. So wherever I click on this worksheet, you're going to see it highlighted in the column and the row, and you'll also see the cell reference in the name box. And cell references are so important. You're going to be using these all the time, particularly when you're doing things like formulas in Excel. Now at the bottom here, I have Sheet 1, this little tab. So we're working in a workbook and we're also working in a worksheet. And I can have numerous different worksheets as part of this workbook. So that is the structure. You have a workbook, but that workbook might contain many different sheets. Notice that we also have horizontal and vertical scroll bars to help us navigate and scroll through our worksheets. And then finally at the bottom, we have the status bar. And this status bar is pretty much fairly plain at the moment, but you can customize this to show different pieces of information that's going to be useful to you when you're working in Excel. Way over on the right-hand side, we also have quick ways of switching our document views or our worksheet views. And we also have a zoom slider, which lets us zoom in and zoom out of this particular worksheet. Now, all of these things we're going to go into in a lot more detail, but I just want to give you a whistle-stop tour of the different elements of the screen so that you'll start to become familiar with some of the Excel terminology and where you need to go to access different options and commands.